So my granddad, I think, had a second-grade education and survived, and by all rights probably did well. My dad improved on that. He was a conservationist at heart, probably before conservation was real common, and I guess instilled that in me from a very young age. Russ Sundstrom, owner-operator of the Broken Box Ranch near Moorfield, Nebraska. Lived here for 25 years. We started rotational grazing approximately 20 years ago, and a few years ago we transitioned or are working towards transitioning to mob grazing. In that process, we've done hundreds of acres of tree removal, miles and miles of pipeline, tanks, watering facilities.
Russ's grazing regime is one thing that's pretty unique about his property here, and there's lots of folks out there that mob graze or graze at a high intensity, but there's not a lot of ranchers that graze at a high intensity but also allow a year to a year and a half of rest between grazing episodes. And in this area where we're semi-arid, 24 inches of rain average per year, so I think those rest periods are really important. And as a wildlife biologist, I can see the patchy, quilty type of landscape that it creates, and it just makes a tremendous wildlife habitat.
Some of the biggest challenges that we've encountered, probably the main one, is weather over the years. You never know, 5 minutes after the rainstorm might be the beginning of the next drought. Probably why we have utilized as many resources as we could is financial, to be able to build the infrastructure and have the resources to do it properly. Manpower is probably the biggest challenge of anything, having someone to share the vision and join in on the workload. My wife and daughter are the backbone of the workforce on the ranch. They take care of way more than they should. Not only the day-to-day activities, but repairs and maintenance and all of it. Typical day, go wherever the malfunction is from the day before, whatever you didn't get finished, and check and move cows, spend time with the livestock. We planted pollinator plots kind of as a long shot. It was something that we knew very little bit about, and we still know very little about. Our objective was, in my studies, I felt like that to restore native ecosystem, I was short legumes and wildflowers in a native situation, and I felt like in order for that to further at all, we were in need of some pollinators. When the pollinators disappear, it's an early warning sign of what's going to be a disappearance of a lot of other things. That's just a more visual one disappearing. Most of it is over application of, sprays, herbicides, insecticides, chemical that probably really doesn't need to be used to start with, and also pouring of livestock for internal parasite control, stuff like that. A few canyons over, Box Elder Canyon, years and years ago, had a narrow gauge rail that ran up there. That's what the railroad used to gather their ties for the rail line at that point in time. So the cedars were obviously, some of them anyway, were big and mature, 100 years ago or more. Cedars are kind of like compound interest. They multiply exponentially. Cedar encroachment, not only as far as amount of acres covered, but amount of water utilized by the trees. The average section in our part of the country, if it had not have been treated at some point in time in the last 25 or 30 years, there's a lot of sections that are probably 65 to 80% tree canopy now, and once it reaches 80 or 85%, there's not much left to work with. Prescribed fire, especially in this part of the country where the topography is a huge challenge. Prescribed fire is an absolute necessity as far as a tool in the toolbox to be able to deal with not only the old growth, but the regrowth, rotational grazing, mob grazing, should help control the regrowth and help get our range back into a healthy status. There are a handful of private contractors in the state that do prescribed burning, and it probably will become more and more commonplace in the future because there are getting to be more and more absentee landowners. But for the most part, probably most of the prescribed burning that's done is done by landowner-driven groups. The exciting thing from the contractor side is, as far as planning to cut trees, has gone from a very simple thing to becoming very, very complex in probably choosing the proper burn line because of topography and landowners, and building off of that and really doing a one and done or a 50-year revamp as far as figuring out what to cut, where to pile, how to address different things, how to protect structures, just like grazing, holistically managing to either keep fire in or keep fire out. I'm convinced that we need to do both.
In my time working with Russ professionally and through the cost share program, I've probably learned as much from him over the years as he has from me. He's taught me a lot about how to manage cedar trees, things that really work well in this landscape as far as managing grazing, what plant communities are possible. We wouldn't even think it would be possible to grow 6 or 7 foot tall big blue stem in this landscape because it's rather dry, and you think of that as more of a tall grass prairie feature, but Russ is doing it here. His level and commitment to stewardship and his conservation ethic, from what I've seen as a private lands biologist, is second to none.
Award-wise, we're not doing anything different than our friends and neighbors and whoever else are doing. We're just picking pieces of each person's operation and utilizing that in the best way that we can in regards to our own operation. There's so many variables involved. You have to do the best you can with the scenario that you've been given. Remember the successes and learn from your failures.